I was originally planning to make this another video, but then I realized that this topic really deserved to be in detail in its own way. I'm going to have to draw most of this because it seems like whoever has the rights to Fazbear's right now is pretty ruthless with takedowns for all of this, so hopefully this video will still be up with mostly my drawings and art. Let's start with some context. Midway through 1985, potentially earlier, Fazbear Entertainment was planning its next phase of the brand, moving to even more complicated and advanced versions of the iconic characters. Keep in mind the brand was already recovering from the loss of Fredbear's Family Diner over the course of 2 years, where it was finally gaining back the trust of the public. And then the 1985 missing children incident happens. It is a devastating blow to the company's image and the faith in Fazbear's as a character and brand as a whole. So in efforts to show how much they turned over a new leaf, to truly show, especially parents, because kids never really care, but specifically parents, that they were trying to change and go from a natural progression to a true panicked, crazy attempt to rebrand the face of Freddy's entirely. Caught in the middle of this was the next TV show, produced by the, at the time, only moderately experienced Yellow Bear Isles, who had never made a Freddy show, and not only had to make a Freddy show, but they were at the center of the big rebrand and make the Freddy show. A show which had already started planning and pre-production through the quickly changing and rapidly evolving image of the company as they were trying to redefine themselves internally. Now, let me make it clear. This was not the first Freddy show by a landslide. The first real show was Fredbear and Friends, which aired in 1978 through 1983, but after the closure of the brand, the show was recut to focus on Bonnie, Chica, Freddy, and Foxy. And with also some extra animation and episodes thrown in there to try and make it a more fleshed out full season to air through 1984 and 1985. But of course, even those characters were kind of thrown out. I mean, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy are still the faces of the brand moving forward, but they wanted to sort of ditch this image of them to an extent. There were also the Freddy and Friends on tour bumpers, but those were like, they only really selectively aired on TV, and they were really mostly just there on Freddy's CRT monitors, where it's like they would be in the corner of the show stage where you'd watch them while waiting for the next show to appear, or maintenance was going on behind the scenes, whatever. It was there mostly as a time filler. What I'm getting at with all this is there wasn't a real from the ground up attempt to do the new 4 from the start. They were piggybacking off the success of Fredbear's, which had a very established brand and character. And a sort of double-edged sword with all of this was Fredbear and Friends was made under extreme supervision of Afton and Emily Animatronics, which would eventually become Fazbear Entertainment. It was supposed to be the perfect representation of Fredbear. So, on one hand, for that show, even though it has less freedom, was very safe and easy to produce. They didn't have to write the characters from scratch or reinvent the wheel, but Yellow Bear Isles did. I'd also wager that because the characters were constantly being tinkered and pushed behind the scenes, that they really couldn't stop Yellow Bear from making changes or design traits. Or at least Yellow Bear made it clear that constantly doing this would prevent the show from ever coming out. So either the show comes out on time, or you push it back to meet your image, and I feel like Fazbear Entertainment picked the former. The end result is that these are really unique versions of the characters because they're basically rewritten from Yellow Bear's perspective. I think the best way to explain how they're different is kind of look at each of the 4 case by case. I would say their interpretation of Freddy is the most authentic interpretation they have in terms of adapting characters. I feel like Freddy was always kind of stuck with the problem of being Fredbear 2 in many ways. Now, maybe you could argue he ended up being a sort of Mickey Mouse to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit situation where he's the improved, expanded upon version, but that dichotomy of having a character who is so similar and so clearly the face of everything prior is what they tried to write this Freddy around. Fredbear is rewritten as Freddy's father in this universe. This is not a familiar connection they have in any other media from what I can understand. This is something they literally made up for this show, it seems like. But you have this narrative of Freddy basically being predestined and almost stuck as being Fredbear's successor. He's the only one who really can do it and kind of has to do it. There's also this sense of age to his character. I would say when it comes to Freddy and Friends on tour and Fredbear and Friends, Freddy feels fairly young. He's definitely an adult in all versions, but he's never as old feeling as the one in Freddy and Friends 86. He feels not old, but more like 30s to 40s kind of range. I think it's even implied in the show he's specifically in that age range. And that's not to say he's like, get off my Faz lawn. You know, he's not that crotchety or anything. He just has a sense of, another day, another dollar, eh, Bonnie? You know? It feels like he's done it all. He's experienced it all. He's still excited to live life and have adventures. Not to mention, he is clearly the businessman and person actually running the restaurant, so you can see how he's pretty desensitized to all of it. Even though he's very expressive, can be pretty funny and pretty energetic at times, feeling more like a remix or expansion on the original character. With Chica also being pretty close in design, but she's clearly focused more on the Chica 2 renovation. Design-wise, she is very different from classic Chica, but looks a lot like what she'll look like in the future. And her personality is kind of close, but that's more because Chica 2 was kind of token girl in a lot of ways. And I think the Freddy and Friends 86 version of her just barely escapes that trap. She still is very cliche in a lot of ways. She is the nice, empathetic one. She likes pink and generally girly thing, but they do balance it out by keeping the gluttony gimmick that the original Chica had, which kind of creates this funny dynamic where it's almost like this vulgar rampage of scarfing down pizzas and cake, mixed with a normally pretty pristine, girly character. And she luckily avoids the later season SpongeBob problem, where she's too optimistic or happy all the time. She's pretty reasonably optimistic. Like, she's definitely the most empathetic and probably the most patient of the group when it comes to people being good or bad. But there are times where she can be pushed to her limits and be pretty snarky or sassy when she's at her wit's end. I think Bonnie is one of my preferred ones where they tried to make him a little more than he was. To me, it always felt like Bonnie was in a kind of awkward spot for what they wanted his character to be in other shows. I couldn't really tell you what the classic of Bonnie's personality was. And on tour, he's pretty clearly dopey and a little out of it, and on tour in some ways is almost a continuation of the original Fredbear and Friends interpretation. Though I do hear he was a little bit more complicated in that version, but not by much. Whereas the Bonnie I see in Freddy and Friends 86 is very different. Most notably, he has this very goofy Liverpool kind of UK accent going on, and he's very polite and proper in some ways, while trying to live up to this kind of idealized rocker legend laid out by Spring Bonnie. Unlike Fredbear, Spring Bonnie isn't related to this Bonnie. He is this guitarist kind of legend, this famed musician that Bonnie was named after and spent his childhood going to Fredbear's to watch perform on stage. He is the idol and inspiration for this Bonnie, and he is trying to fill that same void left after Fredbear and Spring Bonnie pass. He's constantly being compared to that legend, and sometimes he's pressured to the point where he really does feel bad for not being that, even though for the most part he tends to accept that he isn't going to be Spring Bonnie. Freddy and Friends has this kind of thing where I would say almost every character can be the straight man of the group to another character. There is one character in the main four, however, who is never the same normal one, I feel like. Even when they are the grounded rock of the situation, there's always something off about them, because as it sounds from various interviews and various things I found online about the creation of the series, it seems like Fazbear Entertainment really had no clue what the new Foxy was going to be. Now, in hindsight, we can see how we got Funtime Foxy out of this. In the efforts to be a kid-friendly rebrand, they toned back the sharp red. They toned back the metal hook pirate theme. They tried to make Foxy more approachable, but I can only wonder what the hell was happening with Yellow Bear Isle to get the Foxy we got in this show. While design-wise, it is clearly a direct reference to Funtime Foxy, or what will be Funtime Foxy, this is a completely unique character from anything prior. To quote Sherlock Watson, yes, that is the real name of one of the lead writers on the series, who is the most outspoken, you can find forums of this guy talking about stuff from the show. As he put it, Fazbear Entertainment was so uncertain with what their new character was going to be that we could never get a straight answer out of them. Even if we asked something simple like, what gender are they going to be? We could never get a response. Rather than fight this, we decided to play with the idea. What if there was a character who was just this living enigma who does whatever? We made this whole running gag that no one could ever decipher their gender. And to help sell this joke, we made it so they didn't talk. And this end result ended up with this character who would just constantly do things for no discernible reason. And we realized how funny that was as a character, but also how much room there was to develop this character. Because that means there's so many episodes where we can explain why they're like this. And you can probably see how we got to the end result we did. Gender fluid mute Fox Hercules over here was probably one of my favorite characters to write. And I feel like in a lot of ways they really didn't hold back. Even characters who you feel like shouldn't fit in this universe find their way in here. As I said, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie are treated as older generations who've passed away. leaving the current generation to take over their legacy, which is a nod to what really kind of did happen with Fredbear and Spring Bonnie being abandoned as characters for the most part. And then you have, at the time, completely unseen characters, Montgomery Gator and Roxanne Wolf, who were reserved characters made to replace core cast members should anything like the Fredbear's incident happen again that causes controversy with specific characters, with Roxanne being made to replace Chica and Foxy should the need to come, with Monty replacing Bonnie or Freddy. And they adapt some characters you think wouldn't even make sense for this universe at all. The Funtime characters from Baby's Pizza World, not to be confused with Funtime Foxy, even though there also is a Funtime Foxy there, that's a whole mess I could talk to in another entire video. They're reinvented as the flip side characters, kind of bizarro alternate universe versions of the core cast. And then there's entirely new characters like Bella Bugle, who's just there to be Chica's roommate because they wanted Chica to have a life outside of Freddy's. Then you have one of my favorite adaptations of a prior character, Captain Foxy, who acts as the main Foxy's uncle and ties into their backstory and character a ton. And you have one of the coolest character concepts that inspired so many creepypastas, RWQ and the Nightmare characters. I feel like, to me, this will always be the definitive character roster and interpretations of these characters. They really did try to reinvent some of their origin stories. In fact, there's a lot of stuff they did that were never done prior. Other than Freddy, no one really ever had a last name. But now we have Fredbear Fazbear as one of the simpler ones, because they're related. But then you have Bonnie Cottontail, Chica Pollo, Foxy Von Mangle, which, yes, was a reference to the actual troubled animatronic of the Mangle. To try to give themselves more money, Yellow Bear Isles and Fazbear Entertainment made a deal to syndicate comic form chunks of the episodes out to get a little bit more cash, which made Freddy and Friends newspaper, which, I mean, technically did appear in newspapers, but there's more to it. They basically cut up chunks of storyboards into 4 panels at a time and redrew or reworked episodes to fit in a more condensed, fast-paced format. While these would actually appear in newspapers, there was a bit more to it. See, while Freddy's Utah, which is often considered the Freddy's to a lot of people, was closed in late 1985 and all of 1986 until towards the end half of 1987, the rest of the national Freddy's places were open the entire time. And as someone who lived in 20 minutes biking distance of Freddy's Portland, I got to know the newspaper gimmick very well. To set the stage a bit, you go to Freddy's, right? You'd walk in and you could enter for free, but upon entry you also had the option for a Faz Day Pass, which costed $1. If you bought the Day Pass, you get 5 free Faz token and 25 extra tickets when cashing out prizes if you did so that day. It's worth noting each token was equal to 1/4, which meant you were only actually getting 1 true free Faz token. And that many tickets was like a single Tootsie Roll. It was only worth about 5 cents in actuality, so you're really only getting 30 cents free on top of $1 you didn't need to spend. These passes also did a bit more stuff overall at the time. Like, you could get some discounts on pizza if it was like Wednesday, I think specifically, to try and get more people to come in on a Wednesday. And there was other general holiday related stuff, but I didn't care. Because while 5 plays at an arcade was nice every time I went there and a free piece of candy if I wanted it, on the back of every one of these foil tickets was the black and white comic strips, which were updated daily. This incentivized you to come back every day or as often as possible, not just for birthdays. And unlike Houston and Detroit, Freddy's Portland was actually pretty merciful with how the comics are handed out. While you wouldn't get the benefits of a Faz Pass if it was out of date, you could go to a clerk and you could ask, hey, can I get some of the old newspaper strips to complete my set? And then the tired guy would go to the back and then like plop a ton of them on the counter and you would have to sift through them. They really didn't take care of them, but they had a bunch of extra printed, it seems like, where kids would like drop them or leave them behind or whatever. I don't really know why they had so many printed, but they did. And kids like me would take them off their hands to complete our sets of the stories that we were waiting for every week. Personally, I would go every Saturday. And in a way, the newspaper strips were kind of genius since they were updated every day and were associated with one day at a time. It meant by checking the newspaper on the back, they could always confirm, wait, this isn't the story for the day. And it also meant because the attendants were handing this out almost every day, they got to know the stories a decent bit, which meant there was a decent bit of intertwining between the employees and the brand at the time. Compare this to something like the Freddy World Arcade that had the stupid punch cards that you would try to get in there to access your save file, because that's one of the only ways you could do a save file at the time for an arcade machine. Then it wouldn't work, you jiggle the damn punch card, and then it would actually just like tear the holes a little bit, so it would work even less sometimes, and eventually it would get so bad that you just had to buy a new one and had to restart the game all over again, get every character and upgrade again. Sorry, I'm going on a bit of a tangent. While a lot of these strips were lost to time today from people just throwing them out, they weirdly became important as time went on. Due to the way the contract with Fazbear Entertainment and Yellow Bear Isles was written, Fazbear Entertainment had to approve a home release for the series, and they never did. Which is shocking to me because this wasn't some blip in the stream series. Like, you would think this only lasted as long as the Freddy's 2 rebrand, which was very brief. But no, because these characters weren't explicitly the version 2 characters, they were able to survive a good, decent while longer. To put this in perspective, while there wasn't a new season every year after a while, Freddy and Friends stayed on air until 2005. I want you to put this in perspective. 19 years this was on air, and it never got a home release. You could go from school back home listening to Tally Hall and watch Freddy and Friends, then go to Ben 10. I don't know how this happened without a home release. It's almost out of character for Fazbear Entertainment. Think of how much money they could have made off of this. They put their faces on everything, and they couldn't, I don't know, buy VHSs? So there really isn't a way to watch the show legally. I would say the only way you can legally experience the show is by having the newspaper strips, which you had to just get back in the day. And unless you're me, most people weren't stockpiling them feverishly to build out the narrative, which is why I've been redrawing them so the modern audience can experience them. They were such a huge part of my childhood and kind of weekly ritual for me, and I stayed up with them even into adulthood as long as I could. So I've been redrawing them in a vertical format because, you know, mobile phones exist now, so I can make it more accessible for everyone possible. And I am redrawing them so it's not true cleaned up remasters and it's not quite a just direct rip or redraw. It really is more my take on things with the art. That said, I am trying to keep iconic things like this particular face of Chica, which apparently was just so funny that the guy who was adapting the storyboards to the comics just kept it in. I'm planning to do dubs of the comics at some point, since they do cover each respective episode, which should hopefully emulate the experience of watching the actual show to an extent, even though we are missing chunks where the show added animated sections and like more physical gags and all that didn't really translate to the comic that well. I also plan on doing character overviews, kind of like what I was getting into a little bit before, but in a more detailed sense, looking at how the characters evolved in the brand and were adapted and interpreted for this version specifically. Like, I could do a whole thing on the convoluted mess of Foxy. Anyway, that should be a good overview on what Freddy and Friends newspaper is, and my general role as one of the main conservators of Freddy and Friends newspaper. That's all for this time. This was and will be Ozzy the Owlbear.